Are you your children's favorite place to save up their tantrums for? Being our children's safe space can be so exhausting when we don't know how to do it in a way that is really effective and works for us. This is something that we really can put pressure on ourselves to be that reliable, safe space for our children, even when they're consistently saving up all of that big emotional energy for us. My name's Jodie Thornton, and today I want to talk about the 5 ways that you can become a more reliable, safe space for your child. So, when we talk about attachment theory, people talk about the ideas around developing a secure attachment, and this is what happens when we're very young. It's how well we develop a psychological attachment to our caregivers, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of us want to make sure that we are really there for our kids when they're having those huge feelings that spill over into tantrums. When we've really seen that tantrums are not a way for our children to manipulate us, when they're not using this to get what they want, when they're really just feeling emotionally overwhelmed, we know that we have a huge job in being their safe space. Now, the difficulty with all of this is that it's very easy for people to come to the conclusion of, and they do come to the conclusion of, and tell you that that means that most usually as their mother, but the primarily emotionally engaged parent needs to be consistently emotionally available. And the way it's discussed is like we need to soak up their big feelings. We absorb the big feelings off of them, then they feel better, and we're just meant to cope with that because even though we didn't grow up with good emotional awareness or good understanding of what to do with our emotions, we're just supposed to cope with that because, we're the adult and it's our job. And I say that a little bit cheekily because I don't want to dismiss that sense of responsibility. It is important for us to see that we do have more capacity than our children. But by the same token, that's actually a completely inaccurate way of understanding how emotions work. And it also, I find it really, really tough to reconcile when we say that we need to create a perfect environment for our children because they don't have the capacities. Well, when we haven't been raised with those capacities, don't we also deserve some kindness and compassion? So today I'm not going to talk about the typical way of who has to suffer. So I, as the parent, need to suffer so my child can be okay, or do I need to put my oxygen mask on first so that so that I can be okay for my child, so my child has to suffer first, rather than choosing who gets to suffer. We're actually going to look at what it takes to be more reliable as a safe space so that we're not choosing. We're actually just in a place where we feel more and more confident and capable at being there for our children when they really need us. So the first way I want to give you in order to be a more reliable space holder for your child is actually to recognize that tantrums are not a crisis. They're not a crisis even when they're huge. They're not a crisis even when they last a really long time. All a tantrum all it is that if we imagine our children have like a window of their emotional capacity, something comes up, and they don't know how to deal with it, and their feelings tell them that it's a problem, but they can't address it. So that just sits here, and then something else comes up, and it sits here, and that just keeps going until they reach the top of their window. Now, if your child has a small emotional capacity window, which might be because of their age, might be because you've got a lot going on in your home life, it might be because you're in lockdown because of COVID, it might be because they're in a developmental window. There's lots of reasons why a child might have a smaller emotional capacity window at a time, which includes even things like just being hungry and tired, right? The smaller the window is, the less it takes for that overwhelm to happen. But the longer the window is, the more space they have before they get overwhelmed. And now this is where you see a lot of experts will tell you having daily one-to-one time with each child is really important. Make sure you fill their cups. And I disagree with that because what I see that as doing is, yes, it's nice to expand that window, but it ignores the fact that these things are just stacking up. So you're just delaying the time before they overwhelm. Now, I'm not saying don't do those positive things. I'm not saying don't do the things that expand the window. But we also have to address this issue with the feelings coming up and not being able to be addressed, right? So when we think about it in that way, your child is not having a crisis. They're just having feelings that they don't know what to do with. And they've had sufficient number, which might be one, depending on the circumstances, but they've had sufficient number of feelings that they don't know how to deal with, that they're now feeling overwhelmed. And so when you remind yourself, as you're going in to help them, that this isn't a crisis, they've just got big feelings that they don't know what to do with. And that means that you don't have to worry that you're not good enough for this task. You don't have to worry that you haven't been raised with enough emotional awareness to help them. You don't have to worry that you're permanently damaging them by allowing them to have this tantrum. You don't have to worry about all of those things. You just know they've had so many big feelings that they're now overwhelmed. And so that can really, really help shift, rather than going in with the I have to be the safe space and I have to absorb it and I have to do all these things. We can just go in with they're overwhelmed and I'm here, right? That's all you have to do. Now, the second thing I want to add, the second strategy for becoming a more reliable safe space is actually recognizing the difference between being able to be fully present for your child in a tantrum, being there but not able to be fully present. So you're almost like acknowledging and being accepting of the tantrum, but you're not actually being fully emotionally engaged. And then the needing to walk away because you're overwhelmed yourself. And when you notice the difference between those three phases, we want to spend as much time as we can in that deep emotional presence. But you get there not by forcing yourself, but by taking the breaks when you need. So if your child is in a big emotional tantrum and you go in wanting to be in that empathy space, but you find that their emotions are too upsetting for you, or you're finding that it's like another one, and there's been so many today and it's not even breakfast time, you can just sit there and be like, I'm here, I can't hold space for them, but I can be here. And then that allows you to notice, when am I able to go back into that empathy space? And maybe you won't be able to, right? But you're just noticing, when am I able to be there? When do I need to be here? And then when you notice yourself, like, I can't be here, this is too much for me, for whatever reason, you start to get angry at them, you start to get angry at yourself, you start to be panicked, any kind of thing that's just too much for you. Take a break, but just explain to them if you can. So if you can in the moment, to say, I'm just getting really upset, I need to take a break, I will be back in just a moment. You just going to take a break and come back. And the more you spend the time in those three phases that is actually the truth for you, the more capacity you'll build to be able to be in the space where you're acknowledging, or in the space where you're actually holding emotional space for them. So then the third thing I want to help you to do in order to be a more reliable safe space for your child is actually help them solve the problem. So when I said that each feeling comes up because something happens, they get a feeling about it, they don't know what to do about it, that's the thing that leads to the next and the next and the next. So not necessarily that having that unresolved problem leads to the next thing, it can, but because it was unresolved, it stays there waiting to be stacked on, to be stacked on, to be stacked on, right, until the overwhelm happens. So when we think about each thing that's coming up, we want to notice, like, what is it that they're really upset about? And here's where we get sucked into thinking that if they're having a tension because they want to wear the pink shirt and the pink shirt is in the wash, that the solution is giving them the pink shirt. It's not. It's about helping them understand, why is the pink shirt so important to them? Is it because they really want to choose? Is it because they don't feel that you're doing as much washing for them now that the baby is here and taking up all of your time and attention, that they would definitely have their pink shirt if only the baby wasn't taking up so much energy of yours? There's so many reasons why the shirt is an issue, but until we get underneath the shirt to find out what underneath the shirt is a terrible thing to say on a podcast about children, but until we get underneath the reason for why the shirt is an issue, we won't actually be able to resolve it. And there's two parts to this. One is for our child to actually feel deeply heard and understood. And the second is actually to address the issue. So if they're starting to feel not as important because the baby's taking up all of your time and attention, then that's something, once we both have awareness of it, that's something we can address in a different way that is not getting the pink shirt out of the laundry, or it's not, being exhausted about the laundry every single day. There'll be another way to deal with it. And so we really want to get in and under that process. Now, that sounds like a simple thing to do. It isn't when we haven't grown up with it. So when we've grown up with, is it reasonable for you to be upset? No, then you need to get on with it. You need to learn that not everything goes your way. When we've grown up with that kind of messaging, and there's varieties on that, it's very difficult to get in the habit of shifting into what is really going on here and what are the other options without sacrificing myself or other needs. So a great example would be if our children always want to choose what they want to eat and they're wanting to choose ice cream every day, well, that's not helpful because we're sacrificing their health in order to meet their need for autonomy. And so we need to find ways that work for both. So then, when we talk about the fourth strategy, we want to look at what do we do when we can't solve the problem. So in theory, if we had all been raised with this kind of parenting, we would be much more practiced at it, and our children would have been raised with it from birth, and then we would be so fine-tuned at finding solutions. But even if we individual parents were raised with it, and even if our children are raised with it from birth, there's still an unhealthy culture around all of us. And so the chances that we're going to find a solution that is like the golden ticket of like everything's going to work out now, everybody's happy, is actually pretty low. So for now, what we need to do is look at what is the best available. And so when we first start out, the first thing we're looking at is actually shifting into problem solving, right? That's the very first thing. It's being skillful at working out what is the actual problem, what are the options, and what am I going to choose. That shift in and of itself is a big shift. But the second shift becomes being actually really skillful at problem solving around the things that seem immovable, like having to get to school on time, or needing to look after the environment whilst also giving our children choice. There's lots of things where it feels like it's impossible to manage both things, and it's not. Well, some things are actually very difficult to solve in today's day and age because of the unhealthy culture that's around us. But that being the case, what we're looking for is the best available solution. And sometimes when we're making that shift into problem solving, we're actually going to misdiagnose what the real problem is. We're going to think it's about our kids' need to choose when actually it's about their need to feel important. Or we're going to think that if we give them the one-on-one time, then they'll be feeling really important and therefore it's fine, but it's actually about their need for autonomy and to be able to choose what's going on for them. We're going to misdiagnose those things, and then the solutions are very less likely to land. Now, sometimes they work anyway, but your solutions are less likely to be to work if your diagnosis is off, right? So that being the case, we're going to have a lot of experiences where things don't work out the way we want them to. What do we do in that process? The most important thing when we cannot solve the problem for our child or for ourselves is that we mourn the lack of solution. And that means acknowledging that our needs are important. Whether we can meet them or not, our needs are valid and important. It is making sure that we do not try to dismiss the validity or the importance of the needs. So it's the things like, well, we can't solve it today, but it'll be fine next week. Like, we all tell ourselves that, and we were all told that. That is basically saying, don't worry about your needs, which is very different to, if I give you the ice cream, I'm going to sacrifice your health. I want you to be able to choose your own food. I really want that. I also do not want you to have the health issues that come along with eating ice cream for every single meal. Right? So there's the piece where it's like I'm with you and I know how hard it is to not get my needs met. And that process can be very, very difficult, especially for those of us who feel quite anxious about the times where we didn't get our needs met as children, and maybe it was consistently, and also the times where we were shamed or dismissed or treated poorly about having needs. That process of sitting and mourning with a lack of solution can be very, very challenging to learn, but you can do it. If I can do it, anyone can do it. With all of those things together, the last one, which is actually the most powerful one, which is looking for your child to get the emotional awareness themselves that when the first one hits, the need hits, they have a big feeling, they don't know how to solve it, we resolve that one. So there's no stacking. Another one comes up, we resolve it, there's no stacking. Another one comes up, we resolve it. So that's where the power in emotional awareness comes. It is not the ability to grit through your emotions, it's the ability to listen to them, to understand them, and to take action. So this is all a very big process. Now I want to say that those first 4 steps we can resolve together in a small number of weeks. So oftentimes we can get through that process of really, truly, deeply believing that this is not a crisis, of being able to expand your ability to be with them while they're in the tantrum, being able to help them identify what the need is and solve it, and being able to sit with them when there isn't a solution. Those 4 things we can make, like, it's a huge amount of progress in just 4 weeks working together. So if that's something that you'd like to work on, please do send me an email. It's jodie@jodiethornton.com, and we can have a session where you can brain dump, like, this is where I'm at, this is what I need to be able to get to those places. This is what feels interesting to me, but this is what feels hard, and then we'll make a plan to make it easier for you. That 5th one about building their emotional awareness, that takes a bit more time. So the things that we do are simple and small, but the thing that takes more time is for us to get used to interpreting what's going on for our child and working out what's moving us forward, what's taking us backwards. And that's a process where we would work together for a lot longer. So generally speaking, I work with somebody with this over 6 months. And what happens there is that I'm not giving you more and more instructions. I'm giving you more and more refined ways to see what your children are telling you, so that you can then listen to them in a different way. You can then interpret their behaviour in a different way, and then you know what they need next. Now, the reason it takes a long time is because it brings up all our baggage, like all of it. Now, and I don't want to alarm you about that, because when our baggage comes up, we have a choice. We can poke it and see if we can actually make it resolve, because some baggage, even baggage that feels big and hard and tight, once we have a look at it and see that it's actually no longer a part of your life, it's something that happened to you in the past but isn't actually affecting you now, then that baggage can just be let go forever. Some baggage, we notice that while it's coming up right now, it actually isn't relevant to your parenting. And once we can disconnect those 2 things, yes, it feels like that time where this baggage came up, but it's actually not relevant here, then you get to keep the baggage, but it no longer affects your parenting. So we can just unhook those 2 things, and then you get to decide whether you'd like to address that baggage or not. You can just leave it there until a later time, or you can address it, whichever you prefer. And then the last one is, if we don't want to poke around in the baggage because it's too confronting and too difficult, then all we do is we recognise that baggage is there, we parent around it. And there is always a way to parent around that baggage. You don't have to address it all. Sometimes it's easier to address it, and sometimes it's easier to parent around it. So I hope that's been really helpful. Now, I really wanted to get across that the most important thing here is that your children do not need you to absorb their feelings. That's not your role. A lot of people are telling you that, I know, but that's not how feelings work. our feelings are our own signals to tell us what is going on for ourselves. So our role is to help our children understand their own feelings so that they can handle them for themselves. And we have a big role in that over the course of their childhood, but it's not to absorb them and then they're, relaxed, free, happy, and we're like, oh, like that's not necessary. When we shift the way you help your children handle their feelings, you actually don't need to take on their feelings at all. And that doesn't mean you're disconnected from the feelings. It means that you're right there with them, but you're in your dance space, they're in their dance space. And that's the Dirty Dancing reference for today. Thank you so much for listening. And if you would like to talk about working together, it's Jodie, Jodie, at jodiethornton.com. Thank you so much.